Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our talks with Walt as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now going to pick up a little poem, Race of Veterans, poem number 30 of the 43 of Drum Taps. I want to remind you that Whitman early on said in To the Old Cause, my book and the war are one. And I think as we now start to finish, and we're moving now towards the very end of Drum Taps, we're going to get a number of these short poems which are more celebratory of the very idea of the contest, and especially the celebration of veterans. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt. We've given a set of introductory comments on Drum Taps that I hope that you've worked with already, and then we just finished Not Youth Pertains to Me. Now, our Nortons will tell us that this is a sequel poem of the 1865-66 Drum Taps. This piece was placed in the group Marches Now the War is Over, and we'll understand why here in a second, in 1871 and 76, with its first line, Race of Veterans, expanded by the phrase Race of Victors. The poem was returned to Drum Taps in 1881. Now, we've already seen a couple of poems that are celebratory of the sacrifices of the great number of dead and wounded, the veterans of the war. And we're going to play a similar game here. I want to point out already the repetition of the word race, and the way in which that word can mean both, obviously, a collective of some kind or another, some kind of classification word, but race can also mean a kind of conflict, right? A kind of contest of a type, to run in the race and the like. So we'll play that game going both directions here. 8 times this word gets used or repeated. Notice it. Race of veterans, race of victors, race of the soil ready for conflict, race of the conquering march. No mere credulity's race, abiding tempered race. Race henceforth owning no law but the law of itself. Race of passion and the storm. Now, it's an interesting little poem for a number of reasons. Notice we are going to celebrate the idea of victors. I'd like to take us back for a moment to Song of Myself 18. And you'll remember that he said, with music strong I come, with my cornets and my drums. I play not marches for accepted victors only. I play marches for conquered and slain persons. Have you heard that it was good to gain the day? I also say, it is good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they are won. I beat and pound for the dead. That is to say, he's going to celebrate those who are not victors, but here notice, we're going to celebrate the victorious. Notice it's Race of the Soil, which is significant if the title of your collection is called Leaves of Grass. Ready for conflict. This idea of readiness takes us back to the opening poems, B.B. Drums and the other poems of Drum Taps, that America was ready for the war. Of course, that's ironic because we weren't actually ready. As a country, we weren't ready. We had no idea what we were about to get into. Notice the use of the dash here in the first 2 lines. Race of the conquering march. Notice the balance is rather nice here. The conquering march. In other words, it's not just that we marched, but it was a conquering march. And again, we think of Sherman and his march that we mentioned when we did Ethiopia Saluting the Colors, that is to say in November and December of 64. And then in parenthetics, which we've seen a number of times used in Drum Taps, an aside of a kind. No more credulity's race, abiding tempered race. In other words, there's a sense that what the war proved for all of America was that we had staying power. We were able to stick it out. In other words, we were persistent, we were resilient. And we've heard this a number of times. Race, henceforth, owning no law but the law of itself. The law of itself is only used one time in all Leaves of Grass, and it's here, right here and now. I think this is significant in 3A. We're going to come back to the idea that I think Whitman is always trying to respond in Drum Taps to especially Virgil's Aeneid. And you'll remember in Aeneid 6, there's some important lines about Rome and law. And then he finishes with race of passion and the storm. Now this, you'll maybe remember that this word passion came up in the very first word or the very first poem of Leaves of Grass, Oneself I Sing, of life immense in passion. Passion is one of the key words and ideas in all of Leaves of Grass. Notice it's race of passion and the storm. You'll remember in Song of Myself 33 that we were chasing up and down the storm. I think for Whitman, and he used the word chaos earlier in an early poem, the idea that the storm is symbolic of what we have been through. And of course, that will work rather well for his word picture of the ship of state. And by the time we get to O Captain here in a few more poems, we'll be talking about the great pilot Lincoln, who has brought the ship through the storm, weathered every rack, he will say. And yet, the captain is fallen on the deck of the ship, Lincoln, and therefore Whitman, the speaker, unable to celebrate. At 2A for this poem, I think that what we're really suggesting and what Whitman really wants us to remember is that we cannot forget the veterans who are the ones who have made the great sacrifices. At 2B, I love the repetition of the word race here 8 times and the way in which that word can be used so many different ways. At 3A, and I promise this, you'll remember in Aeneid 6, and we've given full lectures on the Aeneid at learnstrong.net if you want to go back and get into this in more detail, but do you remember that when Anchises is meeting his son down in the underworld, Aeneas, he says to him, remember, Rome, remember, he says, by your rule, that is to say Roman rule, justice, law, and warfare, and they're joined together, and I think Whitman is very much drawing on that idea as well. You'll remember as well that the great Emily Dickinson said, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires source need. That idea that not one of all who took the flag can really understand as one laying in the mud, dying, hearing the forbidden strain on their ear. I think it's a fun counter-read to this poem to set the two side by side. I've given a full exegesis at learnstrong.net. Finally, to own a poem like this, how do you feel like we can celebrate often the warriors of a war without necessarily celebrating the war? Or are those two things necessarily symbiotic, and therefore we have to be willing to celebrate both? I think it's interesting to watch the kind of dance that Whitman will play, especially in drum taps, and especially in these final poems. Let's continue to pay attention to it as he continues to challenge us. Thank you.